The only person you're competing with is who you were yesterday. That's it. Forget about everyone else. It's who you were yesterday. So it doesn't matter your friends, companies, colleagues, LinkedIn. It's all about you.
For this episode of Coffee with Closers, I'm sitting down with Eddie Geller, the CEO of Tinybeans. After a successful exit of a previous startup, Eddie co-founded Tinybeans in 2012 with the goal of creating a private social network for families to share and celebrate their precious moments. Under his leadership, Tinybeans has grown to become a publicly traded company with millions of users worldwide. Eddie brings a wealth of experience in entrepreneurship, scaling companies, raising capital, leadership, and innovation. So grab a cup of coffee and join me for this inspiring conversation. Hey Eddie, I'm super excited to have you join me for this episode of Coffee with Closers.
Yeah, it's great to be here, Sam. Thanks for having me on the show.
Most certainly. Every entrepreneur has an interesting story of how they overcame obstacles to become an entrepreneur. So I'm sure you have something very similar to share. Would you share with our audience a little bit about your journey of becoming an entrepreneur?
Yeah, absolutely. I guess the way I think about it is I was never great at school and I was never great at getting jobs. So I always thought I had to create my own job through the journey. And I don't know, I've always built businesses. I've always had ideas. The funniest story is my first business was called Eddie's Internet Solutions in 1996, setting up internet in people's houses and handing out leaflets at local train stations and getting people, as they say, on the information superhighway at the time. So that was, I guess, the first foray into entrepreneurship, and always built different businesses and never looked back, and tried to work for someone else for about 6 months, and that was a fail. So I'm definitely more in line creating the business that I want to work in as opposed to working somewhere else. But who knows where the journey will take me.
Yeah, and obviously your accent gives away where you're originally from. So you had your first successful exit, I think it was early 2000s, right? When you exited that first company, you built it from self-funded all the way from 0 to 100 employees, exited for well over $15 million. And that's a successful company story. And you want to share a little bit about that journey of how you built that company from scratch?
Sure, absolutely. I guess the genesis was I became a internet programmer in the 90s, doing a lot of back-end websites when it was very hard to develop back-end websites. And it was, I guess, in 98, 99, just had too much work on. So started the company 99. It was called Unique Web Developments. It was a web developer. Grew it with 3 people. I remember interviewing people in my home and with $5,000 in the bank and going to, I guess, auction houses and buying desks for $10 and $20 and doing it on a shoestring budget. And then end of that year, we were 24 people, and we just grew through the dot-com times. Now, as everyone knows, 2001, the dot-com crash, we also crashed with it. 60% of our clients didn't exist anymore. Pretty wild. Anyway, we had to go through ups and downs through that journey. And then we morphed into more, I guess, a business consulting, technology consulting company. Web development became more of a commodity. So fast forward the clock to about 2011, and then sold the company, like you just shared, Sam, for about 100 people, sold it to US company wanting to grow into Australia. And it was a great exit. It was a great journey, 12 years building a consulting services business. You go from feast or famine. You're either like, have too much work and don't have enough people, or you have too many people and not enough work. And it was definitely the ups and downs, but it was definitely an incredible journey, and really proud of what we achieved and the great relationships and, I guess, solutions we created.
Yeah, and then after that, you went on to invest in, and we'll certainly get into Tinybeans, the company that you run today. So having had a successful exit, building a service company, would you ever go back and build another service company?
It's a great question, Sam. So I think when I sold that, I said to myself, I will never do a services business again. Mm-hmm. And interestingly enough, a whole bunch of other companies at the time that I knew and was very close to, they also sold out, and they said they're going to do it again in half the time and be double as successful. And I'm like, I don't know, maybe I'm just a sucker for, I guess, punishment or challenge, but I'm like, that's not big enough of a challenge for me doing it again. I'd rather do something completely different. So I said I'd never do services again, and I want to find the next challenge that is different to what I did before, and try and solve for that.
Yeah, I think the biggest, a lot of people are interested in a service company because the barrier to entry is very low. You can start with very little capital. You don't need a lot of resources to build it.
Totally.
And you can get customers and build a successful company. But other than that, what are some of the things that you think is broken about the service business industry that you think has to change? If it has to be, it has to be more appealing for other people to start more service companies.
Yeah, look, it's a great question. I think to your point, barriers to entry is low. Scaling is hard though. I mean, you could get to
Mm-hmm.
5 people, 7 people and use temporary and contractors all the time, but scaling a business is definitely very hard. I found what worked for us was engaging the team with the outcome. So I would say back in 2007, 2008, through the financial crisis, we went through a significant challenge. We were like 85 people, I think maybe 60 billable consultants, maybe even 65. And then we, in 1 week, lost 4 contracts that dropped basically from 65 billable consultants to 25. We lost 40 billable consultant, I guess, opportunities literally within a week. And we had to let people go. And it was basically just a reset. Like many companies obviously struggle through financial crisis. And then when we rebuilt, we thought, well, let's change up the culture and reset the culture. And we rolled out this concept called open book management. I'm not sure if you've ever heard of it. The forefather is Jack Stack, based on a book called The Great Game of Business. Started in Springfield, Missouri. And we sort of reset the culture based on open book management. Wildly transparent, opening the numbers, having people, I guess we're teaching the numbers to them, and they were involved with forecasting, P&L, resource management, revenue and everything. It took us a few years to get it right, but we went from, in the good years, we would do a 15% EBITDA margin at the end of it. Years later, after rolling out this open book management, building a great culture, we got to 22% after giving away 8% bonuses. So we went from a successful consulting services, because I think 15% people would say that's pretty successful, to a wildly successful consulting business based on people being involved with all the numbers and a really successful bonus program to have them all in a stake in the outcome. So if we did well, every single person did well. And if the company won, they all won. So that was really successful, to the point where when we exited the business, we proved that the business was its own and didn't need to rely on me or others. So we had all up front. It's very rare to sell a consulting services business without an earnout. And we had no earnout. So we successfully not only built a great business that was operationally excellent, we also proved that the business could operate and be successful without the people in it. And it was all about the systems, the culture, the operations of it. And very proud of what we were able to achieve. So definitely the consulting services bit is a challenge for sure, but it took us years to refine the model of getting every single person engaged in the outcome and rewarded for the outcome. And I think a lot of consulting businesses, I mean, I know a few I've spoken to recently, and they own their business 100%. They don't share much with their team, and the people become sort of a cog in a wheel that, is not really well engaged, and they deliver an outcome and that's it. But you can deliver much better results if you have them engaged, and they're rewarded, but you're doubly rewarded for the outcome. So again, I've got lots of thoughts. I don't want to take too much of your time here in this, but I could talk about this stuff all day. I'm very passionate about the employee engagement aspect of this area.
Most certainly. So when you implemented that open book model, did you use some sort of an external consulting company to come implement that, or was it some sort of a self-implementation?
Probably a combination of both. We had this coach who began, I guess, open book management and the great game of business has been around since 1983. But in terms of a system to then roll out to other companies, they only really rolled it out about the last 20 years or so. So you could go to Springfield, Missouri and get coached and taught that stuff. So the person who helped us actually successfully went there, and he definitely helped us and guided us through the process. But I would say it's most trial and error. We're at it for years. So we had a coach who helped us, but every year we would reset. You have a goal, a critical number, the scorecards are critical. But if you look at the version 1 compared to version like 8, they're wildly different because it's so unique to the company. And just to give you context, we took 2 years of trips to the US, visiting many other companies in the US through all different wonderful states in this country. I remember driving from Chicago, Illinois, straight to Springfield, Missouri, and we visited 10 companies along the way who were also running open book management businesses to see how they run it. Their huddles, their scoreboards, and there's so much out there. Again, I won't waste too much time here, but I think it's a combination of getting advice, but the best is just trial and error and getting people engaged in the game, understanding what motivates, and get everyone part of the solution. So, but therein lies definitely. I mean, now you can definitely get much better coaches with much more experiences out there, but you can look it up, greatgame.com. There's hundreds of companies that do it, and it's probably much easier now than ever before, but highly recommended for all companies, least of all services companies.
Most certainly, yeah. And there's a lot of different systems like the EOS is being one of them, and then scaling up is another one.
Yeah, exactly.
There's a lot more systems available today than probably like when you said back in the day in the late 90s or whatnot.
Totally.
And you mentioned about going away from the feast famine. What did you find something that worked really well for you, especially in the consulting business, how to not have that feast or famine sort of a situation for your company?
Yeah, I guess to be brutally honest, I think we had moments. Because I think companies scale and get to challenges at different stages. So you could get to 20 billable consultants and you're feeling pretty good. And then the next client comes along and you win some business and you've hired another 5. And then the next 2, your companies cancel. And then you got 3 that you're on the bench on. So, I mean, it's interesting. And through the journey, 3 times we isolated a team to build our own IP and our own software. It's the classic. Consulting services want to build IP. The software companies want to have service revenue. So there's the classic, I guess, conflict. So we did successfully build up our own IP that we ended up selling the software to other companies. It wasn't really massively successful, but at least successful enough. And then the third, actually, time it was so successful, we spun it out. And it's still a company that's alive and kicking today and doing very well. But the challenge is when you're so small, and you've got a client that says, hey, I'll pay you $1 million for work, and last week those 2 people were on your own IP, what are you going to do? Pull them off the IP and onto consulting services? That's the challenge. It's that natural, and it all comes down to leadership, having resolve, courage to make the decisions, what's the right decision. It's so contextual. I don't think there's a perfect formula here. And then I think now, more than ever before, there's far more variable cost models with people all around the world and teams all around the world. We didn't have that when I was building this company. Like, I think by the time we sold, we had 15 people in Manila. We started with 1, and that was a good sort of, I guess, low cost area that we could build and scale around. But it was only really in the last year or 2 we did that. So I think there's much more enduring models to build that have less risk in that feast or famine in terms of the highs and lows. You can have far less variability, I think, between when you need to bring on people or when you actually have to win work. But I would definitely say it's an ongoing challenge and battle. You just want to sort of reduce the exposure and manage your risks.
So obviously, having built and successfully exited a service company, you decided to go invest and then become the CEO of a platform / a community sort of a business. You want to explain to our audience a little bit about what Tinybeans is and how that idea came about?
Sure, absolutely. So to your point, Sam, after exiting, I got involved with an incubator. And incubators at the time, there weren't many, especially not in Australia. This was the second one at the time. Now there's one on every corner block, I think. But at the time, got involved with an incubator, and we selected a range of companies to invest in. And it was a classic, you put 20, 40K in, help them for a 12-week program, and then see how you go. So I was the mentor advisor to a company called Tinybeans, and I met the 2 original founders and really fell in love with the space, the opportunity. I'm a dad of 4 kids, so I can highly relate to the problems they were solving. And the genesis of Tinybeans is around this highly private, trusted space to capture your child's memories and only share it with your family. And then through the experience, access all sorts of things to help you in the journey of parenting. Content, products, services, you name it. So that was the genesis. I then started to work a day or 2 a week with them, just part-time, purely to help out. And then end of 2012, became an angel investor, got involved more a couple of days a week, and then went all in 2014, became the CEO. And then we raised our first external round of capital. And we felt, although we're in Australia at the time, to really build out a B2C business and a brand, we had to be here. So that was the catalyst of moving my wife and kids to the US and I guess in New York now, start of 2015, 8 years ago. I thought I'd be here for a few years, and I guess that was 8 years ago. So the rest is history, as they say. But that's the the core concept of Tinybeans and the business in which we, I guess, got involved with at the time.
The out of four, I can certainly relate to that as myself. So I have four kids as well.
Oh, that's
So
amazing! Awesome. Congrats to us then.
I guess. So obviously, having built a service company and then went on to build this SaaS plus, I mean, it's a subscription based model. So it's a technology platform on a subscription model. And you have multiple other revenue stream. From what I saw, you have, like you said, the products. I'm assuming affiliate revenue
Yeah.
and possibly even like other products that you're selling as well. So multiple revenue streams. So grass is always greener on the other side. What were some of the challenges that you saw on the platform and SaaS business model in terms of getting it to scale and grow that
Yeah.
you didn't see it in the service side?
Yeah. Look, I mean, as I said, I mean, it's significantly challenging. Hard to say more or less challenging, but you don't have the revenue coming in. You can't just go and bill a consultant and get revenue and cash in. So you have to generate a value to a customer for them to pay you a dollar for it, right? So, and then it takes a while to scale the customers enough to basically generate enough revenue for it. And then clearly you have to have around a bunch of people building products. So it's more capital intensive up front.
Mm-hmm.
And clearly over time you want to sort of smooth that out, but then you want to reinvest that capital into growth, right? It's an ongoing problem. So I'm still learning, Sam. I'm still figuring this part out. I mean, we've got I guess, a growing and successful subscription business. We also have a successful B2B advertising based business as well. So to your point, we have dual revenue streams. And my goal is to really scale the consumer side because I have a really rich audience that I don't think we're generating enough revenue when you think about the services we're offering them. So I'm not finished. I mean, I've been at it for
Mm-hmm.
10 years and I think almost now we're in chapter like 3 or 4 of the book of so much more upside to be had here. And I'm proud of what we have. We have millions of our parents and families that rely on the Tinybeans brand every day. And you're very optimistic about what we can do in the future. But if someone said to me 10 years ago or whatever it was, hey, Eddie, this is where you'll be in 10 years, what do you think? I mean, the, the optimistic entrepreneur in me would be disappointed
Mm-hmm.
because we always want to achieve more than we're able to and always want to do it in half the time that's probably plausible. So I'm still proud of what we have achieved, but there's been significant learnings along the way and lots of mistakes on the way to get here. But as I said, I think there's so much more to be generated, and we're still learning every day and trying new things, and that's the exciting bit.
Yeah, so it's kind of crazy that you mentioned. So obviously, the biggest challenge with, especially going after consumer marketing, is the capital that is required to get it to a critical mass of user base and revenue before you can actually scale further. So why did you decide to go public? Was the better alternative than just raising more capital, or you got to a level you had no other alternative but go public?
Yeah, it was more the latter, unfortunately. So I probably tried to raise money with about, I guess, 50 VCs over 6 months in the
Mm-hmm.
US and in Australia, and got rejected everywhere. I couldn't raise the capital really to continue our mission. And at the
Mm-hmm.
time, the Australian Stock Exchange was changing its rules to allow early stage companies to list as a means to raise capital. And
Mm-hmm.
because mining was really out of vogue and tech was getting more and more in vogue, you had a lot of investors who were keen to support new ideas. So we listed in April 2017. But to be really honest, I mean, a business of this size shouldn't be public. I mean, we shouldn't be public,
Mm-hmm.
but now being public is the fabric of the business. We've now used to the public machinations and report quarterly and get order, all those things. But we're still a very small business. And there are lots of other microcap businesses out there. And at the time now, and well, at the moment, as you would probably appreciate, it's not fun being public. Valuations aren't great. Investor sentiment isn't great. But, you know, to be honest with you, if we weren't public today, we wouldn't be around. The business wouldn't have
Mm-hmm.
survived. And we've been able to raise capital successfully over the course of that journey, raising money, even acquiring other businesses. But at the moment, we don't need to raise capital. We're cash flow positive. We're moving to profitability into next year. So the business is in actually a great financial position, which is wonderful. But if you said to me, could you have done that all years ago without raising capital? Frankly, impossible.
Yeah. And I think, like you said, we've seen a couple of our own experience with clients where they were public and they had to raise capital to buy it back and then go private because that was inhibiting their growth because there was a lot of scrutiny on the business and where they can invest money and all of those things, right? And trying to be more investor focused versus the actual company and its customer focused. It was more so, hey, how can we make investors more money? That was the focus, and they had to change that.
Yeah.
So obviously there's a lot of benefits, like you said, right? You were able to raise the capital and stay in business and continue to become more scalable from that experience. So having gone through this going public experience, would you ever do it again?
So I personally don't think that going public is actually a negative experience. It's a hard experience for sure. It took us 6 months and definitely challenged to go public. It's definitely difficult, but whether or not I do it again, it's probably very, again, situational. So if the business is a certain size and has maturity, and I think has the support of a, I guess, growing business that has customers that you can sustain, then I think going public could be a very viable choice, right? And there's lots of successful companies now that are still doing well publicly and in a down market, but they probably be more mature and more sustainable revenue streams. And look, at the end of the day, if you're having to raise money, the capital markets actually could be a really good position for you. You need to manage, obviously, the cost of being public and the compliance costs and the risks, etc. But I guess they're all manageable. I mean, it's not as if it's the first one doing it. So, I mean, if you ask me, would I do it over again? I would. I have learned a lot through the experience and have a lot of scars to prove it, and I probably do it somewhat differently. And probably work with a range of different partners I know now as opposed to the ones I used then. But it is what it is. That's what you always do in life, right? But look, I'd love to experience it in the US. I mean, given I reside here now, but still young. Although I don't look young, I feel young. So still got plenty of time ahead of me to have another go in the future, whether it's this business or something else. So we'll wait and see.
Yeah, and also obviously your early investors cashed out and they made their money too. So they're probably pretty excited that you took it public.
Well, exactly. It's interesting, right? Because I think some were really excited and hung on and did very well. Others were excited, but then sold down too early and that they weren't patient enough. So again, it's not a perfect system as you're going public. You have to take your own assessment of what your risk appetite is and how long you want to hang in there. But like in 2019, for example, we went from being a 23-cent stock to $3.50. It's just wild ride. And people obviously rode it. Some sold out at $1 going, this is amazing. And some hung on, right? And some bought in and went back. And that's the journey, is you being a public company, and the equity markets are just unpredictable like that. I mean, so yeah, I mean, some have done well, but clearly looking at it today, some are down on their money, and hopefully they're patient enough to trade through it. Once the markets get better, I think we'll be in a much better spot.
Most certainly. So let's talk a little bit about entrepreneurship and parenting. So obviously you said you have 4 kids and pretty much your entire life you've been an entrepreneur, starting to sell internet services when you were in your teenage years. So what are some things that you think you should, as entrepreneurs, we should adapt from our entrepreneurial lessons to our parenting? What are some things that are applicable in a parenting world?
How much time do you have, Sam? I mean, this is a whole, we can unpack this for hours. I love this topic. I love it so much. I started a blog on LinkedIn called Confessions of a Devoted Dad. So I'm a big believer of parenting and entrepreneurship and bringing the two together. I mean, one important philosophy I'm a big believer on is sharing the ups and downs of your journey in a parent as you are in the entrepreneur. And that's actually, regardless if you're an entrepreneur, if anything, one of my important philosophies as a parent is actually not to always have this bravado that everything's great. I think it's important for the kids, and obviously depending on the age and maturity, the kids to know that you have tough times, you have bad days, you have difficult times, you have stressful moments. And yes, you don't have to go to the level of detail, but I think it's important to share that. I think my dad never shared those things with very much a lot of bravado and a lot of like things are always great. And I think people, especially in those days, had a very much, it was all about a show as opposed to the reality. And the reality was always something different. I'm a believer of like, yeah, show that things are good and I'm optimistic, but at the same time, life needs to be hard. You need to have bad days. You need to have stressful times. You need to unfortunately go through a difficult or challenging experience. And I think as a parent, it's good to share that. It's good for the kids to see that and understand that. And even the other night, actually, I was speaking to some of the boys at the dinner table, and we had some changes with some of the people internally, and they're asking me like all these questions, like what happens and how do other people feel. And I think treating them like adults is really healthy. And I think that's part of their development and your development. So when they have bad days and you have bad days, that's normal. Because I've heard lots of stories where kids have bad days and they don't share that because they never see a parent have a bad day. Mm-hmm. But if you shared your challenges, you're actually inviting them to share theirs in times of tough, and that they're going to have bad days. So that's one really important philosophy I'm a big believer on, that I think all parents should take part. And it's all part of being vulnerable and sharing challenges and opportunities and learning from them. Again, in my blog, I have lots of lessons around this. I learn every day from them around lots of different aspects, and apply it to my business and apply it to my life and apply it to them. Like, it's a full circle, because they don't have the baggage that we have as adults or as parents or as entrepreneurs. They look at things so simply, and sometimes it's that simple, powerful statement that I think can hold true that you can take away. So I'm a big believer of teaching, but actually more importantly, learning through that whole experience.
Yeah. So, and I think like sometimes we're super sheltered and we're trying to protect them from everything that could be bad, right?
Yeah.
But I think giving them an open door into what you're going through, and obviously them getting comfortable and sharing their own life experiences and challenges that they're dealing with. So what are some lessons you have in terms of raising up next generation of entrepreneurs by like actually training them with those sort of entrepreneurial skills?
Yeah, again, I mean, I personally think there's a handful of really important aspects. One is it starts with being brave and having the courage to try, and being totally, absolutely comfortable with failure and kind of expecting failure. Like, that's another challenge actually in all parts of our lives, least of all having our kids launch companies, is that you want them to fail. I mean, there's so many stories of entrepreneurs failing like 10 times before they finally make it, right? So I think it's just important to be comfortable with failure and be okay to fail and okay to have challenging days. And I think that's really important, that they need to have this confidence of getting up and trying again. And does that mean they're going to try the next day? Maybe not. Does that mean they need to find a job and then have the confidence again to try it another way? Then so be it. But I certainly think the courage, the vulnerability, the being prepared to fail is key, and just speaking to lots of people. And another thing that I find a challenge for entrepreneurs, but again, I think this is part of the journey, is that often we'll have one idea and want to solve for it and think like that everyone has that same problem, but actually not many do. And often the problem is a feature of something, not a massive problem that is enough of a market to go after. But therein lies the challenge that it's going to be destined to fail. So, but again, I think that's all part of the journey. I mean, one thing that, I know this is hard given my story of the B2C aspect, but I'd love the next business and any business to actually do it without investors. I mean, I love the John Dyson approach. Owns 100% of the company, private company, and it's a product company. Now, how he did it was probably tapping into government grants and all sorts of research and R&D. But again, it's just another approach. I mean, the best approach actually is customer funded, right? That's the best approach. I guess government funded is also quite good. But again, I would definitely encourage entrepreneurs to think about ways to build out a company without having to rely on external capital and raising money. I know it's harder for sure, but it actually becomes double as hard once you tap external money. You know what I mean? Like, be careful the hand that feeds you, even if it takes you longer doing it yourself. So I definitely think that's another important aspect of don't be shy to try it yourself. Even if that means the 10 other friends that are also starting companies are raising money, doesn't mean you should go raise money. And the last thing I just share is something I also bring to entrepreneurs, and I was thinking about myself, is that the only person you're competing with is who you were yesterday. That's it. Forget about everyone else. It's who you were yesterday. So it doesn't matter your friends, companies, colleagues, LinkedIn. It's all about you. And I know that's hard
Mhm.
to execute than say, but that's really what I think it's about.
Most certainly. And like you said, I think a lot of times grass is greener on the other side, and sometimes people think like it's a measure of success to have raised money or have went public, right? But it's like you said, is you're competing with yourself. It's not
Yeah,
with somebody else, and you got to get out of the comparison game altogether, because I
totally.
think that helps you sleep better at night, because you don't have to compare yourself to anybody.
Exactly.
If you had to like give like a synopsis of your leadership style, how would you describe it in terms of your leadership?
Sure, absolutely. First of all, it starts with transparency. You probably even a sense of this conversation, very transparent, authentic, very real. Maybe that's an Australian thing. I'm not sure. I'm very candid and direct. I don't have much gray. I say it how it is. And I think that offers people, it creates trust with people. It creates this authenticity, this very, a lot of humility and empathy with the reality of the situation. So that's really, I guess, what I turn up to every day. I think of
Mhm.
myself as just another person on the team, all about servant leadership. I create the environment for people's success. If we're not succeeding, it's on me. Yeah, I'm in it together in the trenches with everyone, because I think there's no way to create success without everyone feeling that they're connected and doing it together. So, again, lead and inspire, but at the same time, do and follow and teach and learn and strive for high performance everywhere I can, but at the same time, be real and supportive and with empathy go in the journey. So yeah, probably a combination of things.
Yeah, and having been in business world for so long, you probably had made some really tough decisions. Like you said, you had a company size had to get dropped to half because of losing a customer or a contract, all sorts of stuff, and dealing with economic downturns, all of those things.
Yeah,
Are there some sort of a decision making framework that you follow when you have really tough decisions to make?
yeah, it's a great question. So I guess one philosophy is always company first.
Hmm.
I mean, yes, it all comes down to the people, of course, but if you're not making the difficult decisions to put the company first, there is no company. And
Hmm.
unfortunately, you need to make tough decisions that impact people, and that's both people that exit and both people that remain. Right? Often it's challenging for
Hmm.
people that remain, more so sometimes the people that are exited. So I think company first. I've always believed that you need to create something of that's not about you and making yourself independent of what you've created. I mean, I want the company to rely on its own systems, people, customers without me or anyone, which is why I've always said the company first, right? And the other thing I think is important is that I always think about every dollar spent like it's yours.
Hmm.
And because of that, you're making the decisions that's the best, obviously, interest for the company. So, I mean, that's probably the biggest thing I think about. And then try and do it with empathy and understanding and trying to balance up the financial challenges the company has with the person's situation. And sometimes that works and it's fair, and sometimes it's not. Sometimes the person feels it's not as fair and appreciated as probably you think. But I mean, it's only in the context of decision, and you got to do what you think is best at the time. I mean, sometimes it's an imperfect system as when you have to make tough decisions, but at the same time, you're trying to do it with grace and supportiveness and being appreciative and all those things.
Certainly. And obviously, you shared a little bit about your experience during the dot-com series, losing almost 50% of your customers. You talked about the 2008 economic downturn. I'm pretty
Yeah,
sure you've also were affected by the COVID time shutdown and how that affected
well,
the business world. So all of those experiences probably prepared you for any sort of downturn you could probably experience in your life. And
yeah.
we're all have some level of uncertainty about what's actually ahead in 2023 and beyond. So, what are some of the things that you think have prepared you, or some sort of a strategy that you've learned that you're probably going to apply in the upcoming downturn that we're all kind of waiting to see what happens?
Yeah, no, totally. It's a great question. So, one area, I mean, I guess there's really two levers the way I think about it. One is on the cost side to have it as
Mm-hmm.
elastic as you can. to have as much variability in the cost base so you can adjust if you need to quickly, right? Because I know this probably is pretty standard, but like reduce the fixed costs, have as much variability in the cost base, try and make sure that you can, I guess, scale that up and scale down when you need to quickly. So that's on the expenses side. But on the revenue side, this is one thing that I definitely learned the last business I wanted to apply here is to have multiple revenue streams. So we've got revenue streams from the consumer, we've got revenue streams from the businesses, and we're trying to ensure that we have enough overlap between them that we can scale the business and manage the ups and downs. So at the moment, the sort of 65%, 70% is advertising, 35% is consumer. I'm trying to get that to 50-50 and even higher with consumer. And really, it's around scaling a business, but also risk mitigation. When things start to go softer and people start to spend less, with multiple revenue streams, you've obviously got more to cover and you're less, I guess, impacted by market forces. So definitely multiple revenue streams, more locked in revenues. Again, all standard things, nothing I'm telling you that's quite unique. Recurring revenues and contracted revenues, but even those can be, I guess, turned off these days anyway. So multiple revenue streams is always, I think, the best way to plan it, and with a variable cost base as much as possible.
Yeah, and I think the biggest lesson we've probably learned, similar to what you just described, is either diversifying your customer base, right? Like you have a two-sided marketplace, you kind of have to build a user base that's enough for your advertisers want to spend money with you. And then you need enough advertisers to warrant that you don't have to charge enormous amount to your users to use the platform, right? So you kind of have to figure out this fine balance. And if you're in the business of selling services or products, you also need diversity of customers too. Because if all you have is the same type of people, and if something affects that specific market segment, and you can have a very big trouble, because we've seen that with the hospitality sector, and there were a lot of companies that were servicing the hospitality, and they were the ones to get really hit when the COVID restrictions became very strict. So I think that's a big lesson for people as well, to deal with economic downturn.
Yeah, spot on.
So obviously you have a lot of things you had to get done. Like you said, you're running a public company, hundreds of employees, millions of users. You have a two-sided marketplace, all of those things. So, and you have a family of 4 children, all sorts of things. So you got to figure out how to get more productive and get things done. So are there any sort of a productivity hack that you have to stay productive and get things done and nothing get in the way of your initiatives?
Sure. I guess I'm not sure if this is a productivity hack, but I'm a big believer of mental wellness and health and keeping physically fit. So every morning I work out and train, and it's like me time. And it's my own time that I feel mentally fit, I feel physically fit, I feel good about the day ahead. And that sort of sets me up for success. And then at the same time, I sign up for different races. I do Spartan racing with a bunch of other friends, which sort of sets challenges throughout the year. So again, it allows me to, I guess, encourage me to be mentally fit and physically fit every day through those races. And I think that prepares me for work and family, that I can figure out prioritization, set goals, focus on what's important at the time. And it's a constant battle. There's no perfect system. There's no perfect way to sort of manage it accordingly, but it's really about trying different things and what works out with respect to, I guess, work and play. But you can't help others if you can't help yourself first. I've always been a believer of like personal wellness first, family, and then work as it relates to obviously supporting your goals. So that's the way I guess I think about it.
Awesome. My final question for you is, knowing what you know today, what advice would you give your younger self?
That's a great question. I'd probably say back yourself earlier and be prepared to fail faster.
Awesome. I certainly enjoyed our conversation, Eddie. Thank you for sharing your advice and your life lessons with our audience. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me on the show. It's been a super fun conversation.
This episode of Coffee with Closers is brought to you by OneIMS, a leading digital marketing agency helping businesses win new customers. To request a free marketing ROI audit, please visit oneims.com. If you enjoyed this video, please share it. To make sure you never miss an episode, please subscribe.